New America, an organization in Washington, D.C., has released a study showing that extreme far-right terrorists have murdered more people in the United States than Islamic terrorists ever since September 11th, 2001. And by released a study, I mean they counted up all of the murders and said, hey, look. The problem with any study like this is in the definitions, and even New America admits that the word extremism can be very subjective. For this data set, when it came to the Islamic terrorism, they only counted that which was done by or inspired by Al-Qaeda, not other groups like Hezbollah or Hamas. That doesn't seem to leave out many attacks, though, seeing as Hezbollah only had one that caused a few deaths, but it was actually in Beirut. It was against a U.S. embassy vehicle, but no Americans died. And Hamas has talked about attacking the United States, but has never actually followed through in it. A much harder job is figuring out what qualifies as right-wing terrorism. They only included attacks where they could absolutely identify an ideology as the primary motivator. For instance, they included the recent attack in Charleston, where 9 people were murdered at the hands of a white supremacist. But there are a lot of gray areas where we spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on in the mind of a killer. So while they included the Charleston attack, they did not include the atheist in Chapel Hill who murdered 3 Muslim students. They included the murder of George Tiller, the abortion provider, but they didn't include Elliot Rodger, the misogynist who murdered people because he hated women. But even erring on the side of caution as they did, they still found that right-wing extremists were responsible for nearly twice as many deaths in the United States as Al-Qaeda. With that in mind, why are we still spending billions of dollars sending troops overseas and also spending more money here at home on measures that inconvenience the American public at best and violate our constitutional rights at worst? Looking at you, NSA. The reason is that we're human, and humans are terrible at evaluating risks. Here are just a few of the factors that can make us think a situation is more dangerous to us than it actually is. Number 1 is seeing a huge, well-publicized event like planes crashing into buildings on national television. 2 is seeing a situation that is seemingly completely out of our control, like terrorists who just seem to pop up out of nowhere. Number 3 is a situation that is completely unfamiliar to us, like terrorists who identify with a religion that we don't know anything about. And number 4 is identifying with victims. So thinking of the victims as just people who went to work one day and then were brutally murdered. And another factor is just the word terrorism itself. It's a big attention-grabbing word, and it's not a word that's often applied to right-wing extremists. Masha Gessen is the author of a book about the brothers who carried out the Boston Marathon bombing, and she had some interesting things to say about Dylann Roof, the murderer in Charleston. She pointed out that while what Roof did was definitely terrorism, we shouldn't necessarily label him as a terrorist. I was expecting to disagree with her, but I ended up really appreciating her nuanced view, which was that the idea of labeling someone a terrorist is a way to other them, to push them away, to dehumanize them, so that you never can really understand them as a complex person and understand why they did what they did. And that, in a way, is why it's so easy to figure out what counts as Islamic terrorism, while it's very difficult to figure out what counts as extreme right terrorism, because we don't call the extreme right terrorists. We think more about the multitude of issues they have going on that leads them to do what they do, as opposed to just saying, well, it's their religion, therefore it's Islamic terrorism. So I think Gessen is right, but I don't think that we can address the issue by pointedly not referring to Roof as a terrorist, while the rest of the world continues to consider every Islamic act of hate as terrorism. As the New America study points out, that's only going to continue to downplay the severe danger of right-wing extremism.